From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what we're working on for you over the next 60 minutes. The latest Rural Main Street Index revealing continued financial stress on farms.
When you put livestock in with grains, it gets better.
We'll tell you why loan delinquency rates are surprising. As rice harvest races on, it's a promising new trade deal that has the industry's sights set on China.
There's no doubt that China needs rice.
We'll tell you how the deal, a decade in the works, could change the industry. She's a dairy farmer and a dietitian connecting her farm to consumers in a unique way.
I think the biggest thing is building a relationship with people. Let people come out, see what you do.
And she's our real faces of dairy. And in John's world,
are mid-sized farms disappearing? Maybe not.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Chevy Silverado. High-strength steel for high-strength dependability.
Now for the market-related news. The Federal Reserve painting an optimistic outlook of the overall economy this week, giving signs of another possible rate hike this year. After nearly a decade of the Federal Reserve trying to restore a collapsing economy, the Fed changing its tune. On Wednesday, the central bank said it will start withdrawing a portion of the trillions of dollars it invested after the 2008 financial crisis, a sign the Fed is confident the economy is growing. The Fed says despite the plan of attack, interest rates are on hold for now, but expecting to raise rates one more time this year.
The Fed has what's referred to as a dual mandate, which is to balance on one side economic growth, but on the other side price stability. We have started to see economic growth pick up, and there appears to be some momentum, and I think that's part of the reason why we have seen several increases in interest rates over the last couple of years.
Kaufman says on the price stability side of the equation, the Fed has an inflation goal of 2%. With inflation running below that this year. Mother Nature turning on the heat this week, which could help push the immature corn crop to the finish line. Here's a map of all the states that are currently behind in corn maturity. USDA's latest report showing Illinois is 20 points behind, Minnesota 22 points behind normal. The only state not lagging normal is Kansas, and that state is right on pace with average, with 61% of the crop mature. Well, the lack of maturity also means harvest is running behind. USDA shows corn harvest is 7% complete, 4 points behind the 5-year average, but only a point behind last year. North Carolina is the furthest along with 68% of the crop harvested. That's followed by Texas, where 67% of that crop is out of the field. And it's the first week for USDA to report soybean harvest. The agency says 4% is already harvested, a point behind average. Milk production continues on its impressive growth pace. USDA's latest numbers show production for August totaled 18.1 billion pounds, a 2% increase from 2016. Now, production per cow hitting the highest since reporting started in 2003 at 1,948 pounds. That's a 26-pound increase from last August. New numbers show feed yards seeing 44 straight weeks of positive margins, but there's a large disparity between feed yard and packer prices. The Sterling Profit Tracker says feed yard closeouts averaged $25 per head last week, a $10 drop from the previous week, and beef packers brought home $180 per head last week, a decline of $15, but still $29 above year-ago levels. All right, those are the headlines. Meteorologist Mike Hoffman joins us now with weather. Mike, I don't know about other viewers, but in northern Indiana, it felt more like July this week than it actually did in July.
No doubt, Tyne, it was hot and humid across most of the Midwest except the far northern plains. It is going to change. It is that time of year. You expect it to. But let's take a look at the drought monitor, and you can see we've expanded the drying areas across much of the central plains, central Mississippi Valley, into parts of the Great Lakes. It's still very dry, but not as dry in western Dakotas and into eastern Montana. You can see a month ago it was already getting very dry and with extreme exceptional drought across much of eastern Montana, western Dakotas. That has shrunk up a little bit. But we still have a ways to go. It takes a while to get out of a drought situation like that. So let's go day by day this week. There's the heat and humidity. going to continue. Huge dome of high pressure sitting over the Tennessee and Ohio river valleys as we start the week. I do want to point out we'll have to watch Maria along the East Coast. Things can change with the forecast. As of now, though, it looks like most of that will be offshore. Showers and thunderstorms on Monday up and down the Plains states, western Plains states. By Wednesday, that first front coming into the Great Lakes, central Mississippi Valley, back into Texas with some scattered showers and thunderstorms. Secondary front coming into the northern plains, and then by Friday, that secondary front moving through the Great Lakes with some rain showers behind it. And yeah, there'll be some snow in the colder sections behind that system there, but mild temperatures, more typical for this time of the year across most of the lower 48. Next front out in the northwest could be a wet one as well. We'll talk more about our longer range forecast in our next half hour.
All right, thanks, Mike. How could the Fed raising rates impact the macroeconomic picture? Tommy Grisafi and Brian Splitt join me next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by John Deere. Where can you find the most comprehensive inventory of John Deere certified pre-owned tractors, combines, and sprayers? MachineFinder.com. Sometimes the best new addition to your fleet isn't new.
Back now on U.S. Farm Report this week, Brian Splitt and Tommy Grisafi. I mean, this weather this week has been amazing. It felt more like July this week than it actually did in July, around here anyway.
Brian caught a sunburn. I mean, look at this thing, it's just, I wonder how it'll affect the beans. I talked to some growers, and there's these beans, especially coming here, they're still green out there, some of these beans, but then there's other growers who, they said they're coming out a little small. The beans are a little small at harvest, and maybe that's something that's fueling the market.
Yeah, we need this heat to kind of push some of the crop along, right? We know that this corn crop is pretty immature, but as we're hearing some of these early harvest results, what are both of you hearing? Brian, you have customers, all across the U.S. What are you hearing?
Well, I think the general theme so far has been better than expected. And Tyne, might I say that today you look better than expected. But, the thing is right now, better than expected is compared to what? That is compared to what the producer has been expecting out of his own crop. But the USDA for the last several months has been telling us that our expectations are not correct according to what they are seeing. So is better than expected priced into the market because we've already seen better than expected from the USDA in the last two reports?
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. Better than expected is all that I'm hearing out there. So does the trade, is that better than what the trade expects, better than what the producer expects? How are these prices reacting right now, Tommy?
Well, I think it could affect beans more than corn. So if the final USDA number is 171 or 169 or 168, we have some statistics here on, we've had that bearish August number, bearish September number. I don't know that it matters at this point, but if bean yields were 1 or 2 bushels lower, then you have a flyer, then you have a market. Brian had mentioned the 980 level, which he has some statistics on that, how we pivoted around that level. But it's going to take an incredible amount of energy to get corn to stay up at a level that the grower's happy with. Beans are different story in beans.
Yeah, so let's dive into beans. I mean, we saw some impressive price action on the charts on Friday. What happened Friday? And what sign does that give us?
Well, Tommy had mentioned 980, and we had talked about 980 a little bit before the show. And that 980 level became really important at the very beginning of the year. 981 1/4 was a low back in January, and we didn't take that level out until right in front of the March planting intentions. And that also aligned with the 200-day moving average. We've tested 980 both when the market was in a bull market back in July, when we turned into a bear market in August. And so now we're back above 980, back above the 200-day moving average. And so what I'm hoping is that propels us. Technically, we're going to see some more short covering and some technical buying, projects possibly up towards the 1017 to 1020 area.
I mean, who would have thought? When the USDA comes out with some of these recent reports and we see some price action like we did, and now you're talking in the $10 range for beans. I mean, do you think this momentum continues, Tommy?
I do, because there's a monster. China's just a monster, and Mexico came in for beans this week, and it's a lot easier to put a $9-10 bushel of something in a boat than it is a $275 bushel of corn. And so all the things you could do with a bean to bring it back to your home country and feed an animal, the numbers make more sense to import a bean. There's plenty of wheat in the world as a feed. There's plenty of corn around. There's a story in beans. Analysts have been wrong for years about, hey, we're going to have this big carryout, 600 million, 500 million. And then you get towards the end of the year and we're only 400 million. Then maybe the bushels come in 1 bushel lower and we're 300 million. And then something happens in South America and we're out of beans. And we're definitely not running out of anything. But I do remember about 4 or 5 years ago, where Claypool, Indiana went $5 over bid for beans 3 days before harvest. Well, we don't have that environment right now. So the basis in beans is pretty wide. The futures are rallying, but I notice with my clients, for every day futures go up 15, you go check your cash market, it only went up 10.
No, yeah, I've heard a lot about basis this fall. When you look at China, U.S. Trade Representative this week kind of talking about his sights are set on China, looked at China as kind of a hurdle for the U.S. There's kind of some negative rhetoric around China right now. Do you think that any of that will have a ripple effect into our soybean exports to China, or they just need beans right now?
I don't think China can afford to not buy U.S. soybeans. They consume so many soybeans that the rest of the world cannot produce enough beans without our production involved. Now, that may affect some of the timing of their purchases, so their import program, will vary between North and South America. But right now, we've got some concerns about planting in Brazil, and the later their planting goes, the later their harvest is going to get, and that might push more export demand into our books.
All right, we took a deep dive into soybeans. We need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll kind of do the same with the corn market, so don't go anywhere.
Unlock the power of ag technology this December in Indianapolis at the first ever Ag Tech Expo. Learn all about it at farmjournalagtech.com.
Welcome back. Well, before the break, when we talked about the markets, we were kind of joking about this better than expected rhetoric that we're hearing, because that's really what's coming out of fields right now. But with corn, I am hearing a lot of producers say it's not last year's yield, but it's better than what I expected this year. So with this corn market, how much do we really need to shave off of that before we could see a positive reaction in price?
Well, I notice a lot of times on this show, Tyne and Brian, we always talk about the grower. But you got to flip that hat around and put your end user hat on. And right now is the opportunity for the end user to buy as much corn as they can. When you look at corn out with the carry, it gets a lot more expensive. And so if you're an end user and you need corn, this is it's on sale. And as the months go on, as an end user, every month that goes by, you're going to have to pay more for corn. And so unfortunately, what I see happening in corn is that the weak hands are selling it to the strong hands. But when you look at DS18 corn at $4 and then probably Nova 18 beans at $10, the structure of the grain market with lower fertilizer prices and the chance to get lower cash rents doesn't look that bad for next year if you take action. But you have to take action.
Yeah, but from a producer standpoint, we don't like those prices being on sale, right? If it's good for the end user, it's not good for the producer. So what needs to happen in order for us to see better prices for the producer? What needs to change in this corn market?
Well, if it's for corn, the story may not be directly corn. Right now we've got wheat prices are competitive, and wheat has been making new highs for this particular move. Wheat bottomed out 2 days before corn did as far as the lows that were made. So as wheat climbs higher, soybeans are making new highs for the move. So, as Tommy had mentioned, we have to think forward and look at acreage allocations. And if the other two markets continue to go higher on their own story, that might drag corn a little bit higher as well. And you get a little technical story in here. If corn can get over 362 a bushel right now, that's a major weekly high. I think you're going to have some short covering, and potentially that could project corn up near 380. I think if we do see that, you're going to have to take a look at the carry. If you have corn in your bin, that's going to give you most likely over $4 basis the July contract. You're going to have to take some action there.
Switching gears to the macro picture, the Fed this week coming out talking about the overall economy's in good health and looking at kind of restructuring some things. If we do see the Fed raise rates again this year, what type of effect will that have down the line?
I think it's good to get back to a normal interest rate, but the tools that usually when you have rising interest rates, because there's wage inflation, and we don't have a lot of wage inflation, we have a hard time finding people who want to work, but things seem to be balanced. And what's happened with these hurricanes actually is we've noticed some of our economic data come down from all that lack of shopping and spending and all that money that wasn't spent. I think our economy comes out of the box next year just roaring. We have to rebuild half the state of Florida, a chunk of Texas. If you want a job in America, you can get one. The rates have been artificially held down for 7-8 years. And at one point that was helping the farmer. It's now since hurting the farmer. They can go borrow a bunch of money. They can go borrow $1 million, produce $900,000 worth of stuff, and get a loan to do it again next year. So there's cheap money out there. But as we know from people who buy too much green equipment or red equipment or whatever your favorite equipment is, you can get in trouble buying stuff at low interest rates.
When we look at the dollar, and I've talked to several economists that want to focus on the weaker U.S. dollar and how that could possibly improve exports in the new year. What do you see happen with the U.S. dollar?
Well, I mean, right now the dollar has been in a really aggressive downtrend, and something that we have not seen that we've seen in previous years is that tie where a weak dollar means stronger commodities. Now, relationships in markets do change, and it's not that easy anymore where the dollar down means strong commodities. But more recently, in let's say the last 12 months, we've actually seen stronger grain prices tied to a stronger dollar. So I don't know if that means, the buyers are concerned that if the dollar continues to go up, that their purchase power starts to decrease. But we'll see how it goes.
Less than a minute left, so real quick, when we look at these markets, kind of stagnant prices, volatility creates opportunity, but we haven't seen a lot of that lately. So what's the biggest mistake you see producers make with the markets right now, real quick?
If they do have a futures and options account, when volatility, which we're at like a 10, 11-year low right now in some of the options contracts, selling volatility at record low volatility can get you in trouble. We've seen it happen a few years ago with folks in beans.
Brian?
I think your attitude can be the difference between being in an ordeal and being on an adventure. And I think we should all make sure we're staying on an adventure together and not being in an ordeal right now.
Yeah, good point. All right, when we come back, we'll get their closing thoughts on the show. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Time now for closing thoughts. Brian?
The market has dealt with a lot of bad news recently. We've had bean yields increasing 2 reports in a row, and yet we haven't been able to take out August lows, much less the June lows that were made prior to summer. We've had yield increase in corn, and yet these markets are holding these lows, and we're starting to see some buying interest coming in. So I don't think we want to get too down on ourselves right now. Let's keep an eye on things. If you have a concern about downside, maybe use some cheap options. Tommy had mentioned that volatility is low, which means options are cheap.
All right, Tommy?
I have a customer, his name's Tim, and he's suffering his 40th massive production loss ever. But the truth is he grows a crop every year and he just bought a new pickup. So he's having his 40th consecutive production failure. One of the biggest mistakes I'm seeing in marketing bushels is it's hard for us to do our job when we can't get the facts right from the customer. And so where people are getting their news from, sometimes there's a lot of free news on the internet and sometimes free is just too expensive.
Good point. Thanks, Tommy. Thanks, Brian, for being here. Stay with us. We'll be back with more U.S. Farm Report in a moment. The reality of a struggling ag economy is forced consolidation. But will consolidation consume U.S. ag? That's the topic of this week's John's World.
The Des Moines Register just became the latest publication to put out an article warning of a decline in the number of mid-sized farms. Now, it's hard to argue with their analysis, except we've heard it all too many times before. The often prophesied consolidation of farms into gigantic operations has been a standard prediction in farm media for my entire career, and it's always just around the corner. To be fair, farms like ours have gotten bigger, but not as fast as we have perpetually forecast. Compared to other sectors, notably pork and poultry, grain farming is taking its sweet time getting huge. You can read more details on my thoughts in the latest Top Producer magazine, but I'll skip to the bottom line today. Grain farms reflect farmland ownership more than farm economics. It's just really hard to operate huge farms in the absence of huge land holdings. Let me give you a recent example. A landowner dies with a modest farm, and being without children, she leaves her acreage to 5 nephews. It took extraordinary effort from the one nephew who was farming the land to buy out or rent the other 4 shares. This kind of disaggregation occurs constantly across farm country. Most grain farm acres are rented, not owned. When owners change, the operator often changes too. So not only does ownership fracture, tenancy is up for grabs as well. Also, my impression is big operations don't have longer lifespan than smaller farms. Big-time operators seem to come and go. There is not the slightest hint that big corporations or wealthy individuals are amassing enormous land holdings. And even if they did, it would be field by field, not in large tracts of contiguous acres. To get Brazil-like chunks of U.S. farmland would take not just a lot of dollars, but decades. There are farms like mine that have never been up for public sale. The size of American crop farms was probably most strongly influenced by the Land Grant Act 150 years or more ago. Once the land had been diced up into 160-acre tracts, it became very difficult to reunite. For all of you who worry about a few big operations taking over grain farming, take some comfort in the fact that our land ownership pattern makes such a future both distant and unlikely.
Thanks, John. Well, still to come, as rice harvest races on, rice farmers hanging their hat on a major win, opening trade to China for the first time ever. But with a few hurdles still standing in the way, will this year's crop actually make it to China? That's the Farm Journal report after the break.
From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. We have much more ahead. Rice demand is growing after China signed a deal more than a decade in the works. That's our Farm Journal report. She's a Hoosier working to connect the farm to consumers, and she's our real faces of dairy and customer support. John laid the groundwork last week. Now he's dissecting NAFTA. Now for the headlines. The latest Rural Main Street Index slipping to the lowest level since December 2016 as the reality of larger than expected crops are starting to hit the combine. Conducted by Creighton University's Ernie Goss, the survey explores financial conditions in a 10-state region. The September survey showing the overall index remained below growth neutral. And a product of falling farm income, 51.2% of bank CEOs say they are restructuring farm loans. Now, RMI also finding a 2.1% increase in farm loan defaults, a rate that Goss doesn't view as alarming.
The bad news is liquidity positions. That's loans, and the loans are increasing, the delinquencies are increasing, the foreclosures are increasing, but not at a fast clip. There we're moving from C plus to probably C minus, maybe into D category, not F.
Goss thinks a weaker dollar combined with strong exports could help the markets overcome large crop supplies, ultimately helping prices. Well, as tax reform takes center stage in Washington, farmers and agribusinesses keep a close eye on it. The American Farm Bureau pushing Congress to make some temporary provisions permanent. Farm Bureau says tax tools like cash accounting and interest deductions for small businesses are vital to long-term financial planning.
Because farmers and ranchers are price takers, we need the ability to hold our commodities over from year to year. So we need the ability to store our corn in the bins or hold our calves over until we can ensure a good price in the market for those. And by using cash accounting, we can do this and not have to pay tax on those items until we receive the money for them.
Senate Finance Chairman Orrin Hatch admitting this week that passing comprehensive tax reform will be tricky. He says it's a complex topic with more chances for legislators to disagree. Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue is traveling the states hard hit by hurricanes the past 3 weeks. On Monday, his boots hit the ground in Florida. Perdue met with Florida citrus producers and took an aerial tour of citrus country. He also talked with vegetable, dairy, and sugar producers. Perdue says USDA will speed up help and ask Congress for financial aid. The Bayer-Monsanto merger may not happen this year like originally planned. The company is now shooting for early 2018. Bayer filing this week for an application to extend the EU review deadline of the proposed acquisition. The new deadline to review the deal is January 22nd, 2018. The push to produce more organic commodities is growing production. USDA says sales of certified organic ag commodities grew 23% from 2015 to 2016. Sales came in at $6.2 billion in 2015. A year later, sales hit $7.6 billion. California continues to lead the pack, seeing nearly $3 billion in organic sales.
Agriculture's national forecast is brought to you by Kawasaki and the new Mule Pro FXR side-by-side. Ride like a boss with high-end styling and rugged capability.
That's it for the news. Meteorologist Mike Hoffman now has a longer-range look at weather. Mike?
Thanks, Tyne. Yeah, that's right. We've kind of flip-flopped the overall weather pattern over the past week with the heat coming into the east and the chilly temperatures out west. Let's see what the jet stream does. And you'll notice the ridge gets broken down as you would expect this time of the year. By Wednesday, the trough coming into the northern plains. By Thursday and Friday, it'll move on to the East Coast, and this trough will probably be what keeps Maria offshore. But if you live along the East Coast, you need to pay attention to that pretty closely. This is going to be a shot of chilly air, though, into the plains and eventually Great Lakes as we head into this coming weekend. 30-day outlook for temperatures. I'm going above normal for New England. This is a tough forecast. I'm just going to tell you right off the bat because things may flip-flop back and forth. Below normal over the Tennessee Valley, central Mississippi Valley, above normal out west, and also in southern and central Florida. 30-day outlook for precipitation. I'm going below normal for the Mississippi Valley, basically, above normal in the southeast, and above normal in the northwest. Tyne?
Thanks, Mike. Well, as trade debate comes to a head with leaders from all three nations currently combing through NAFTA negotiations, rice is caught in the middle. September marks National Rice Month, and leaders say while demand remains steady here at home, it's key countries where they'd like to see appetites for U.S. rice grow.
The biggest market is the domestic U.S. market overall. That's where the bulk, I'd say, about 60% of the rice grown in the U.S. stays in the U.S.
Rice is gluten-free, also featuring whole grain qualities, both traits helping the crop grow in popularity.
Many ingredients that are made from rice are also gluten-free for additives, for nutritional bars and different things such as that.
Once this American-made rice leaves the field, it's processed in the mill and turned into popular products like beer. Sullivan says if you ever consume Budweiser or Bud Light, you're already a supporter of homegrown rice.
Anheuser-Busch is virtually the largest buyer of rice in the world.
From brews to puppy food, it's milled U.S. rice growing in ewes.
Even puppy rations use a large amount of rice now because they found that it's very soothing to the puppies' tummies.
But what doesn't get consumed domestically needs a home. And today, there are a few countries that top the export list.
Most of our rice is marketed into the export markets in the Western Hemisphere. Many of the Caribbean islands, Central America, are big rice eaters.
Most of the rice from California is consumed domestically, and then about 25% is shipped to Japan.
The rice industry says they're lockstep with the rest of agriculture on current trade deals like NAFTA, urging the administration to do no harm in agriculture's slice of the trade pacts.
Mexico is our largest market. Most of it's a rough rice market, a raw material market, but and Canada is our third largest.
Another scrutinized deal that could potentially pose fallout for rice, South Korea.
We don't necessarily have a stake in the technical aspect of the agreement. We do export a lot of rice to South Korea every year. And if we get into some sort of a trade dispute, that could have a negative effect on the overall trade aspect. So we're watching that very carefully.
Crutchfield says rice producers want to protect current trade deals, but as some key buyers wane, it's encouraging the industry to find new markets.
Iraq is still purchasing U.S. rice, but as recent as 3 or 4 years ago, was buying several 100,000 tons of rice a year. This past year, they bought 30,000 tons. And with the loss of those kind of markets, you either need a resumption of trade there, or you need to pick up new markets.
Sullivan says Cuba is one market that could come back on board, ideally positioned to take on more exports from the rice belt in the southeast.
At the end of the day, Cuba buys somewhere between 500,000 and 600,000 tons per year. They import that much rice. Cuba is the closest that there is, which takes out the logistic issues.
But an even bigger buyer would be the world's most populous country.
You know, China is a monster of a market. The facts are, based on the consumption rates of rice in China, the short version is in a 14-day period, they could eat the entire U.S. crop. So it's an unreal market.
Well, there's no doubt that China needs rice. Over the last 10 years have gone to being a competitor of the U.S. and others on the export stage to being the world's largest importer of rice.
The administration paving the path this year, signing an agreement in July to start exporting rice to China for the first time ever, a deal more than a decade in the works.
One of the things that was unique about this phytosanitary agreement is it's the first time the United States government has ever allowed a foreign government to send inspectors to the United States to review and inspect potential facilities, individual companies.
U.S. rice industry calling it a win, but the reality is little progress has been made since that signing.
Taking 11 years to get the first step behind us and being able to see how many steps we have out in front of us is a little disconcerting.
Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue recently setting an aggressive timeline, saying the first shipment of U.S. rice could hit within the next 3 months.
If they move forward in any kind of a timely fashion, we could see that happen. My most realistic estimate would be to say that I'm confident that we'll see some rice from the 2017 crop be exported from the United States to China.
Once the first shipment breaks through, Crutchfield thinks the demand growth is huge, possibly turning into a six-figure market. As the 2017 harvest races on, it's this year's grain that could break the trade barrier, with the rice industry hoping new demand floods in. Arkansas is the nation's leading rice producer. Growers there around the Stuttgart area are seeing yields anywhere from 15 to 20% above last year. And in Northern California, they're just starting to roll in the fields, but yields look to be slightly above last year. When we come back, we continue our trade talk. John Phipps takes a deep dive into NAFTA.
NAFTA, Part 2.
Your call is very important to us. Please hold.
Well, last week, John talked broadly about a 2-decade-old trade pact. This week, he gets more in depth about NAFTA.
Last week, we looked at some of the issues I think are going to be important during the ongoing NAFTA renegotiations. This week, I want to establish what we already know about this agreement and how it's working, and the negotiations in general. Let's look at the state of trade between the U.S. and Canada and Mexico. First, there are some things you want to keep in mind. First, always look at goods and services. U.S. services like travel, license fees, financial services, and consultants make up about 1/3 of our exports, but don't get enough recognition. Sometimes they're not even quoted compared to stuff like cars or corn or the goods. Because we want to run a significant and growing surplus in the services trade, it needs more attention. One big problem is when imports are larger than exports is often referred to as a trade deficit, which is often confused with debt. In fact, any such deficit is fully paid for with U.S. dollars. It is more accurate to say that dollars are one of our biggest exports. Furthermore, there is no linkage with the balance of trade and the federal debt, a fact that seems to be misunderstood by our president. There are effects on national savings and investment, but as you can see, there is no correlation between our balance of trade and the fiscal deficit, even when we ran a modest surplus. NAFTA was at best a moderate boost to our national economy, adding about $125 billion per year to our GDP, which is less than 0.5%. Second, notice that trade both ways with our NAFTA partners is growing. Lost in the rhetoric about a big trade deficit is the fact that trade overall is expanding in North America. Third, the biggest imbalance is, of course, Mexico, but this is really hard to avoid when a rich country trades with a poorer country. Right now, we have a small trade surplus, for example, with Canada. Overall, though, NAFTA has been very good for ag exports like corn and pork. NAFTA disrupted some parts of our economy significantly, but in the 20-plus years since it began, all three economies have adapted to it, and any changes now will require more years of painful adjustments. Okay, next week I'll wrap up how I think the issues will be resolved. Or not.
Thanks, John. He'll have part 2 next week. But if you have questions before then, just email John at mailbag@usfarmreport.com. When we come back, a Who's Your Farmer wears many hats and using one of them to connect consumers to the farm. Real Faces of Dairy is next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by QLF. For 40 years, QLF has been proud to support American farmers that feed the world. U.S. Farm Report, brought to you by Balchem, standing beside you for 50 years, bringing real results to the dairy industry. Now, through the Real Faces of Dairy project, you can share your story at realfacesofdairy.com.
It can be hard to relay the message of agriculture to consumers. One producer, who is also a dietitian, is using her passion for both the farm and food to tackle misconceptions in a very unique way. Betsy Gibbon has the story of Fort Wayne, Indiana producer Sarah Keenert in this segment of Real Faces of Dairy.
Are you ready? Come in and see the babies.
The Keenert Dairy Farm in Fort Wayne, Indiana is filled with guests.
The baby cows like to be nice and warm.
Questions and chatter from young milk drinkers, the way producer Sarah Keenert prefers it.
I think the biggest thing is building a relationship with people. Let people come out, see what you do.
She strives to share the family's 300-head Holstein dairy with consumers who want to visit.
And I try to develop that relationship with them and understand what their needs are. And then in return, they kind of trust me or take what I have to say for heart. Maybe it may not change their mind, but it does open their mind as to why I do what I do or why I believe in what I believe.
But this producer has a niche. Keenert is also a dietitian who mixes together messages about farm life and nutrition.
And I'm able to talk a little bit more in their common terms as to kind of the science background of what dairy products does for our bodies. What people can do if they're lactose intolerant, if they have milk allergies.
In addition to hosting tours, the dairy puts on a fall festival every year.
So this year the theme for our festival is Star Wars.
Incorporated with a dairy twist, which will be seen by roughly 25,000 consumers who will attend over 6 weekends.
We have the corn maze is Darth Vader holding, like with the Force, milk, and it's used the force of milk.
Keenert tries to make it more than just fun and games. Visitors have a chance to see all of the farm.
Here during the festival, we actually have a farm tour. It's a complete farm tour of the entire farm. We hide nothing.
It's not easy opening the doors of the operation, and early on, Keenert brought in people from the community to practice.
Ask me questions. You know, get on this hayride. I want to know what you see. I want to know how it makes you feel.
Advice on starting the conversation as she encourages other producers to follow.
Having an open mind and being open to having that conversation with someone when the opportunity arises. So do you guys see the baby's earrings? Does that say who they are?
Reporting in Fort Wayne, Indiana, I'm Betsy Gibbon.
Thanks so much, Betsy. And you can also check out that Real Faces of Dairy segment online. Well, when we come back, Machinery Pete has this week's Tractor Tales.
Tractor Tales is brought to you by John Deere. Where can you find the most comprehensive inventory of John Deere certified pre-owned tractors, combines, and sprayers? MachineFinder.com. Sometimes the best new addition to your fleet isn't new.
Welcome back to Tractor Tales, folks. This week I'm at the Farm Progress Show in Decatur, Illinois, and really have a treat here. I'm with Mark Bryan from Tuscola, Illinois. And Mark, boy, you have a beautiful 59 730. Why don't you tell us about it?
Thank you. This tractor was delivered in 1959 to our local dealership in Tuscola, Illinois. Good friends of our family. We purchased it from the family. It was stuck then, so we completely rebuilt and overhauled and put every new seal and we tore it completely down and rebuilt it. And then we plowed with it to make sure we didn't have any leaks or any mechanical problems. And then after we do that and adjust anything that we might have seeping or anything, then we start on the cosmetic part of it. John Deere's been in my blood since I was 12 years old, and my dad and I have a real nice collection in our family farm, and we call our museum. We have quite a few John Deere tractors, some rare ones and some common ones. Well, I thank God every day for me getting to be with my father, because we farmed together for years before he retired, and now we work on tractors together. I see him every day, and it was just a privilege and an honor to be at my father's side every day farming, and then in the wintertime we would work on the tractors, and I couldn't ask for a better life in that respect. New stuff's out there. Anybody can buy new stuff, but I'm the type of person that loves old stuff, and I love old John Deere stuff, and that's what I like to be around.
Thanks for that. Well, today's Country Church salute goes to the New Hope Methodist Church located in Nobby, Missouri. They tell us the church is turning 125 years old next weekend. All neighbors and past and present members are welcome to attend that event. Our thanks to David Novinger for sending that in. And if you have a church that you would like to send in, you can do that to the address on the screen. Stay with us. We have From the Farm photos next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Credenz soybean seed from Bayer, designed using smart genetics with tailored varieties to fit any field condition.
Well, Mike, harvest is underway and photos are starting to roll in. Ty Bennett was busy picking popcorn this week in Mason County, Illinois, and snapped that picture.
And viewer Louis DeRussell in Essexville, Michigan, which is in the Saginaw Valley area. Their grandsons are having fun in the sunflowers. He says the boys, ages 1 and 3.5, are amazed at how tall the sunflowers get. I am too a lot of times, actually. 12 and 13 feet tall. Looks like a good crop this year.
Yeah, finally a crop taller than you, Mike.
Oh, corn gets there. Yeah. But.
Well, you know, it's been so warm here in northern Michigan, and I know a lot of our viewers have had these above normal temperatures. I mean, is this here to stay? I mean, these above normal temps?
No, into early parts of this week, and then it definitely cools down pretty big time in parts of the Midwest and the Great Lakes.
All right, remember, if you have photos or videos you would like to send in, you can do that to the address on the screen.
And from all of us at U.S Farm Report, I'm Mike Hoffman.
And I'm Tyne Morgan. Thank you for watching. Be sure to join us again right here next week as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S Farm Report, America's longest-lasting news program for farmers, is powered by Ram Trucks, America's longest-lasting pickups.